history of each and every aspect of the history of Karbala, the tragedy of Imam Hussain, continuing from the early days of Muharram. And Alhamdulillah, we have reached to a point whereby now we are talking about the 40th day. The 40th day, known as Arba'een, known as CHELUM, passed away on Thursday last week. However, we have continued this tradition of paying attention to the detail aspect. I always use the word detail aspect because unless you go into the depth of the matter remains at the surface. So you have to understand the tiny minute details, why each day is so significant, why each occasion in Muharram, each occasion in Safar is so important for the history of Shia, for the history of Muslimin, for the history of Ahlul Bayt alayhi. Because each day carries its own significance. Since the time Imam Hussain has received the letter in Kaaba when he was doing Hajj, ever since that time, continuing all the way up to his final journey to Karbala on the 10th day of Muharram and Ashura, and then another journey starts after that, and finally this journey, which starts on these days, has its own weight, its own significance. And when you look at the importance of 40 days, or the tradition of somebody passed away, your friend, your family members, your parents, your cousin, you do your Pursa Majlis straight away. And then the most important time in that family is the CHELUM, because we also have tradition of doing the Majlis of 40th of that person who passed away. Have you ever thought about where this tradition of 40 days is coming from? Is this 40-day tradition has got a deep history. And therefore, Imam Hussein's CHELUM, I'll talk about it in a minute. But look at it in the light of Quran, and look in the light of history. In other Islam, apart from Islam, in other religions, we also have the tradition of 40 days. For instance, Christians are celebrating now the Lent. Lent means abstaining from the dearest thing which is close to your heart. You are giving that up. And you're doing some prayers. Catholic religion. We live in Catholic state, Catholic city. So the Lent is the 40 days of, from their point of view, is some sort of ibadah, some sort of prayers. And they give up. If they like chocolate, they give up chocolate. If somebody is something there, the people who really observe Catholicism, not the people who talk about it and they don't observe it. That's the Christian tradition. Look in the Quranic history that in Surah Al-Baqarah, 51 ayat says about Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked Moses to appoint himself in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he devoted himself in prayer for 40 days, he was able to hear the voice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the importance of the 40 days prayers. And in Surah Baqarah it says that when Allah has appointed you for 40 days and you have taken the calf, i.e. the cow, for prayer, the people have taken the calf for prayer, nay, you were doing injustice, you were wrong. And that's Quran talking about the importance of the 40 days. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has also said in this tradition of Islamic mystery, the mysticism in Islam, those who pray and do ibadah continuously for 40 days receive the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a form of some kind of a spring of knowledge or some sort of blessing comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into that person. This is the continuation of the ibadat for 40 days. In many religions you'll find that day and night if you do ibadat for 40 days in the devotion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will receive something. Now I've reached to the next stage. This is talk about the other religion. For us, Shia, the follower of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, we have the golden opportunity to practice that taqwa, practice that ibadah during the day of Muharram and the Sunday. From the time of Ashura till 40 days. And look at those 40 days of trouble. These 40 days were extreme trouble days. When after Imam Hussain, who passed away from this world in Karbala, his head has been severed from his body and then has been brought to Sham, and the heads were still alive. Think about those 40 days. Imam Hussein's heads were not buried in those 40 days. Imam Hussein's heads and all Shuhada Karbala's heads were kept in the courts of Yazid somewhere. On the 40th day in Arba'een, they were able to bury those heads. This is the historical fact. This is not a story. It's a historical fact that has happened 61,000 Hijri, at the time when this tragedy of Karbala occurred. This tragedy of Karbala is a historical fact that every year must be remembered in so passionate way that you should be able to pay most attention, because you are going to live rest of your life through the history of Karbala. Your entire life should be taken from this history. If you look this aspect of the history of Karbala only, then you would make sense rest of your life. If you isolate that for 2 months and 10 months you live another life, then it doesn't make any sense. And therefore, it's important for us to pay the significant importance of Arba'een. And when we talk about the people, from the day, early days we talked about, in the early days of before the 10th of, we talked about Muslim ibn Aqil, how the cousin of Imam Hussain has sacrificed his children and himself. Then other Sahaba, the other friends, Habib ibn Mazahir, Zuhair al-Qain, Muslim ibn Awsaja, all those companions of Imam Hussain and Rasulullah, they all